Welcome back to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. You can find us online at tertiumquids.org. And a reminder, our archives of previous episodes on YouTube. Search Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Up next, Director of Policy for the Tertium Quids organization, Caleb Taylor, is on the line with us. Going to go over where we stand as we rapidly approach crossover in the Virginia General Assembly. Caleb, how are you doing, sir?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
Well, I tell you, it is a bizarre time when we're told for months and months and months that the governor needs to, get all these scary guns off the streets, and then they pocket veto the assault weapons ban, which, granted, I'm not complaining about, but I was told, oh my goodness, these are learned men and women telling us that these assault weapons are the scariest things, and then they just kind of bury it, and it never even gets to a vote. I think the word hypocrite comes to mind, but one of my favorites is I like to call them multifaceted, because sometimes just two faces aren't enough. Take us into what you're seeing so far in the General Assembly 2020.
Well, I think I actually think your comments on the assault weapon ban are quite interesting. I would probably call this more politics as usual. They put something out that galvanizes a lot of people to get really upset about that one bill, focus on that one bill. They pocket veto it, and then they start passing red flag laws. So that's what's going on.
Yep.
We're having red flag laws. In fact, several of these red flag laws have already passed their respective chambers and are crossing over as we speak. We haven't even gotten a crossover on the 11th. This is some of these things are going much faster and much quieter than we originally imagined. And I think the game playing with the quote unquote assault weapons ban is what led us in that direction. We got really, really angry about the assault weapons ban, and then once it was pocket vetoed, things got quieter on our side. And that needs to change. There are worse things.
And the assault on all of the Bill of Rights all at once, which this red flag law is, and I want to get into some of the nuances we go along here, because usually they try to coordinate, but I don't think they did this time, to where the bills are almost identical, and then they have to go to a committee, and usually that's their get-out-of-jail-free card is, we couldn't get to, an agreement once we, the two houses passed them, one's different than the other, and we'll just have to come back next time. It's the same thing they're doing with the redistricting reform. Now the Democrats that were all in favor of redistricting reform, now that they have the majority, aren't so in favor of it, and they keep claiming that, the language in the bill isn't what we wanted because we had to compromise. The cake and the eating it too comes to mind in this. But talk about how these two red flag law legislations will match up once they go through crossover past the other houses. Will they just match up neatly, or do they have to be tweaked in committee after the session is concluded?
Well, there's a fundamental difference between what's going on in the Senate and what's going on in the House. The Democrats specifically have a bit more sway in the House than they do in the Senate, because in the Senate there's a number of more moderate Democrats who, I won't say are holding the line in any way, shape, or form, but they make the mix a little bit more interesting. Because of this, that's what we're seeing in terms. That's why we're starting to see some changes, amendments, substitutions in these laws. So it's my expectation that yes, they will have to come to committee afterwards, simply because of the kind of nuanced way that the slight differences in the makeup of the Senate versus the House, just in terms of general ideology and where these different senators and delegates stand on the issues. We need to realize, and as we get further and further along in this very, quote unquote, divisive era in our country, what we're seeing is effectively, and if I had to just kind of guesstimate, we essentially have 9 different ideological parties in this country, and they exist in every single state.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're being forced to vote for is not the party we agree with, but the coalition that they belong to. And those coalitions are named Republican or Democrat. And so this is the interesting thing about our particular system, especially here in Virginia, is sometimes you can get the quote unquote some Democrats on board with your issues because they're not of the same ilk as other Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we're seeing a lot of that in the realm of healthcare, some very promising things coming through on healthcare as well as energy reform.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting a lot of support from a certain section of the Democratic Party that recognizes that monopolies or cartels are not a really good way to do business in the state. And so we're getting a lot of support from them as well as from conservative Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
Which is very promising.
Well,
so this is kind of the thing that we need to keep in mind.
We hear a lot about how we're a nonpartisan state. Nobody votes, nobody registers as a voter under a political party. Wouldn't it be nice if the elected office holders had the same rule? And we could open it up. Maybe start having 3-4 different. Maybe a libertarian gets elected in one particular place, or we are now. I guess we already have a member of the Democratic Socialist Party of Virginia in the House of Delegates. But you had mentioned something early on, and I want to circle back to it. You had talked about how they pocket vetoed the assault weapons ban, and everyone kind of calms down a little bit. My fear is, as it is standard operating procedure in the General Assembly, is get a new majority, do all the radical things in the first year. The second biennium year, everything calms down, and you're just all about rainbows and kittens and funding schools and law enforcement, and that's all we are. We're not the folks who tried to take away your due process, and we're not the folks who wanted to allow your neighbors under complete anonymity to just have people bust down your door in the middle of the night and not give you any say in the matter, and that we will soften by the time 2021 comes around and the next General Assembly election comes up, even if it is just the House seats this time.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is generally the pattern that we see, and it doesn't matter whether it's the Republicans or the Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
They move towards the middle once the election starts to come along, and this is just the nature of our electoral system. There's an incentive for them to move toward the middle so they can grab more votes for this upcoming election. And unfortunately, as we've seen over and over and over again, the average voter's memory is very short.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a major problem. That's one of the issues that one of the things that a number of organizations, including the Virginia Institute of Public Policy, is working on, that continual education on these issues, not just the basics, not just Frederick Bastiat, but the continual education on the understanding the particular those issues that are particular to Virginia that we really need to pay attention to on a regular basis, like right to work, like the assault weapons ban was bad enough, but it was a constitutional issue. It wouldn't have collapsed the economy of Virginia had it passed. It would have been something that we would need to be very cognizant of and pay attention to, but it would not have collapsed the economy of Virginia. The right to work laws absolutely will. Mm-hmm. And that's a really big fundamental thing, because frankly, you can't buy assault rifles if you've lost your job.
Yeah. and when we see movements against the right to work, this was something they had been promising in the stumps for years building up to this. Is this something they really, truly believe in, or is this just keeping a promise to those who send in all those late bags of money the week before Election Day?
I think you're going to see an even mix. I do think, especially among the younger Democrats, there is a lot of, I don't want to say ideologues because it seems unfair, but they are very ideologically tuned in to the standard Democrat platform. They believe in it. So the younger Democrats, you're going to see them really believe in these places. or these ideas. But I would say that the older those Democrats and even Republicans that have been there longer, I mean, the longer you see, the less ideologically attuned they are. So you're going to see kind of a mixture of those kinds of ideas, and I think you're going to see that for quite some time. We have a lot of young people have come into the House, but the House and the Senate in the last number of years, and you and I, as older and more respectable gentlemen,
seasoned citizens,
would acknowledge, young people are passionate about what they believe in, and they are. I was in a committee meeting for health and welfare and institutions for the House earlier this week, and they were talking about a COPN bill, trying to eliminate certificate of need requirements for ambulatory for physician-owned ambulatory offices, ambulatory healthcare, and it was a young Democrat, that once the hospital association stood up to fight against this bill, it was a Democrat who passionately reamed the hospital association, and he did a fantastic job. I would even say, coming from an economic standpoint, what he was saying was great microeconomics. So you're going to see that passion come out, and some of it's going to be good, and some of it's going to be bad, and you just have to pay attention to it.
Is there, and I worry about some of the younger Republicans and Democrats who are perhaps coming out of a local school board or have come up through, that they are going to be less likely to be independent, and it was my concern because they are looking at a career. There is a future for them. They're less likely to break ranks like an older guard Republican or Democrat because they have their place and they're going to know it. But these younger ones are saying, hey, someday I'm going to run for Mark Warner's Senate seat, or I'm going to run for the congressional district seat from my neighborhood, and I've got a long, illustrious career in crony capitalism. I mean, elected office. Caleb, is that what you've been seeing? That's a great story about the Democrat kind of pushing back against the hospital associations. But does that last? Is it sustainable? And do the leaders of the parties kind of swoop in and say, no? If you want to have a long career here, this is what we need you to do.
I think in November, I probably would have more strongly agreed with you. I think now, having had a number of conversations with them, the millennials that are coming in, and some a little bit younger than the millennials, I think it's probably going to be the opposite. I think the longer they're in, the more likely they're going to toe the line. But it seems to me, just having had several conversations with some of these legislators, or having several conversations with some of their offices, it seems to me like they're operating under the belief that they're going to take the Democrat Party over. Or they're going to take the Republican Party over. And that the line that's going to be towed is theirs. And that's it seems to be, it's not something that they say openly. But it seems to be like this attitude that they've brought in, which really is, if we look at it, it really is kind of a common understanding or a common belief that millennials often carry. It's like, what I believe is right, and you need to get on my bandwagon. And we're seeing that in these young legislators, sometimes for good, sometimes for bad. So I'm not suggesting that this is a universally negative problem. I'm saying that this is just an observation that I have made, and some of this is going to work out for the better, and some of it's not.
Caleb Taylor, who is on with us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio, legislative director for Tertium Quids, and in Richmond, watching the General Assembly do their thing. Interesting. You're talking about identification. We don't want to see ID or a sonogram anymore. The House pushing forward legislation that takes away from what I was told was a woman's health care issue, where now we're opening up abortion clinics to people who are not medical professionals and perhaps just certificate holders, and they're no longer needing to see a sonogram image of what's going on. I likened it myself to a mechanic who says, I can fix your car without ever looking under the hood. And then the voter ID nullification as well, taking away that, even moving towards same-day voter registrations. This seems to be just ripe for all sorts of corrupt behavior, and it seems to be pandering in the worst sort of way. What are you seeing?
I completely agree, and this is kind of following along. It's not so much a kind of a party line thing as a long-term, mostly, I would even say social media driven belief system that has been imposed on an entire generation. It's this idea that, the idea that you have to have a license to vote is racist, which I find amusing because that's essentially saying if you're not white, you're not smart enough to get a license.
Yeah, well, it's offensive.
It seems to me in and of itself racist. But it's these ideas that have been passed along again and again and again, and because of that, these especially the younger generation has grown up with this being said to them.
Right.
So they fundamentally believe it. And I think what's going to need to happen, especially in those two issues and a number of others, including if any of these right to work repeals or backdoor repeals pass, is the policy community is going to have to just watch and is going to have to take very clear notes, very clear data. And as these abortion clinics start having issues with patients dying because they're not qualified to be involved in this, even as medical professionals, or if we start seeing people losing their jobs en masse because unions are coming in and saying, you're not allowed to work here unless you pay me, and people are just not willing to pay them, or any of these issues, we're going to have to pay very close attention to what the effect is so that anything that does get through in these next 2 years or so, we have an opportunity to readdress them in the future and get rid of them, which is it's going to be an uphill battle. It's going to be just kind of a hard road to slog. And we just need to make sure that there are people out there that are willing to do it. It can't just be the small, the policy community is a pretty small community right now, especially in Virginia. We need more. We need more people out there having these conversations, more people out there collecting this data, and then treating the data properly. This is something that I bring up to our coalition members quite often. There's nothing more annoying to me than data that's been mistreated because you want to prove a point. No, we need a real data.
Yeah,
I can guarantee the data is probably going to show that right to work, getting rid of right to work is bad for the Virginia economy. All of economic theory essentially supports this idea. So I know what the data is going to say, but that doesn't mean that we mistreat the data to make it say that. It's going to say that. We can trust it's going to say that. But we need people of integrity, of solid character, collecting this data, working this data, releasing the studies that are not rigged in any way, that can be trusted, and we need it to be done from now for the next several years. It just needs to be paid attention to. Anything that gets through this legislative body that's recently been voted in, we've got to pay attention. Always.
It is absolutely, and you speak about demagoguery and the idea that somebody is their political brand and you can't have a conversation with them. I was struck on the VCDL lobby day, pictures of Chris Hurst having a very, seemingly, good, deep conversation with VCDL members, and he's perhaps the most notable, even before Michael Bloomberg got involved, anti-gun advocate for, albeit perhaps personal reasons as well, but not hiding in his office, not finding some place to go so he doesn't have to engage, and that at least gives you hope that the discussion can win out the day. Last one, Caleb, is energy policy, Dominion, the connection between Dominion and the office holders, the campaign contributions, the governor's clean energy demands, and yet ignoring nuclear. Where are we right now with energy policy issues in this General Assembly?
Now, there's a number of bright spots. For instance, HB 1132. HB 1132 is a bill that essentially reinstates the SEC's capacity to, or the State Corporation Commission, their capacity to actually keep an eye on Dominion and the other energy monopolies, electricity monopolies in the state. It has been, and I want the listeners to really understand something. Dominion has been overcharging you for years, and they're legally allowed to do it right now. And that is because every couple of years, when it's time for the SEC to do their audit, their triennial audit, somebody comes through with a bill in the legislature to push that off for 3 more years. So every 3 years, over and over and over again, this gets pushed off so that there's no oversight over Dominion at all. So they just overcharge as much as they want. You really can't do anything about it. So there are some good bills. There are some bright spots that we want, that we would like to see as part of the law. But like you said, the Virginia Clean Energy Act is out there. It is a terrible bill. I will say that I've heard whispers that there is an energy omnibus coming.
Oh, wow.
It is going to be a massive substitute that rolls in a number of these different bills into one massive bill. And I don't know if that will happen, but I know that there are efforts to work on this right now. And we need to be careful of that. As we see at the federal level, nothing good comes out of an omnibus.
Well, but doesn't Virginia have, procedure? And believe me, I thought I knew everything. I didn't realize you could completely rewrite the rules of order if you take over the majority. And I thought there were standards that, both parties would have to live with. But isn't there a single issue rule regarding bills in the General Assembly?
If there is, I've never seen it, and I'm telling you, this has been an issue for years. It is not the Democrat Party that's doing it; it is the Democrat Party and the Republican Party, and this is a problem. This omnibus bill that I've heard whispers of has been talked about very favorably among some Republicans as well. So we need to recognize that we can't sit here and blame one side.
Yeah.
We need to sit here and recognize that both sides have their hands there to their elbows in the pot, and we need to recognize that and pay close attention to what they're doing, especially together.
Yeah.
Now, again, some of the things that they're doing together are really promising pieces of legislation, and we shouldn't turn away from those simply because maybe a Democrat is the sponsor. Or a Republican maybe that we've had problems with in the past as a sponsor. We shouldn't turn away from those things that are promising. Don't pay attention to who's carrying it or who's supporting it. Pay attention to what it is in and of itself. There are a ton of organizations that are putting out voting records, that are putting out action alert. Click Virginia is a new one that's putting out some really great in-depth action alerts. TQ, we do the same thing. They're in Middle Resolution. They do it as well. There are a number of organizations that put these out, and you need to get on those mailing lists and just get this really in time information that's going to help you. Okay, what are these bills that I should be supporting, and what are these bills that I should be against? Because it really doesn't matter who the patron is.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that, because it is a mixed bag right now, and it's still a paper-thin majority on either side for that. And with a $66 billion spending plan, year one of the biennium, coming down the pike, there's an awful lot of barrel for them to dig into as well.
That's going to be a major problem, I'm going to tell you now. In the near future, we'll talk about this. When we go against, have another conversation next year about the legislative session, I guarantee you we're going to be talking about how much a problem this budget's been.
No, sure, and just the tax rates it's going to have to create on its own.
Oh, yeah.
Because Amazon's not going to pay that whole bill.
Mm-hmm. That's right. They're not.
Caleb Taylor.
I would be surprised if they paid any of it, honestly.
TertiumQuids.org is the website for us. All of the work we do, the white papers, the Tuesday morning group coalitions, join in there. Caleb, thank you very much for taking some time out with us as we approach crossover here on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening. For all of us here, again, find these archived up on our YouTube channel. Search Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Until next weekend, for all of us here, so long, and thanks for all the fish.